tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami, dhammam saranam gacchami, sangham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi buddham saranam gacchami, tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami, tatiyampi sangham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi buddham saranam gacchami, tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami, tatiyampi sangham saranam gacchami. So, where did my other hat go? There it is. So welcome everybody to Tuesday. Come on in to Tuesday meditation here. So I actually forgot the microphone cord today, and then I forgot to charge the cell phone. So kind of technology, and it's bloopers. And today is, many times it's kind of, you can feel the kind of difference in the air. And now spring is coming, and it's bright much earlier. And things are very energetic, and kind of this feeling when things are about to grow. Kind of the buds on the trees are about to burst, kind of going to be there soon, and then we'll have all these leaves everywhere, and summer will be back. And probably long before summer hits, we'll see people in shorts when it's 5 degrees, 5 degrees out. And so this is kind of the way that things go. Kind of, there's a cycle to the way things work. And I remember before, when I was a young man, I was kind of a very anti-religious man. I was kind of one of the men in my life that kind of, as you're a young kid, you kind of imprint on these older men. And one of the older men in my life who I really kind of liked and loved and looked up to, he was really into science. He was actually had a lot of gratitude towards him. One of the things he would do when I was very young was he would debate with me. like a little 5-year-old kid, and he's debating with you about philosophical issues. I think he was going for his PhD in philosophy. So and he had a master's in sociology. So he figured, he had these views like whatever, there's it's all social constructs. So I'm going to teach you how to think when you're very young. He gave his son, when his son was 8 years old, he gave him this book. It's called Sea of Slaughter. And it's this book by, what's the name of the author? Was it Farley Mowat? Farley Mowat. It's kind of a famous Canadian author. It's all about how humans have killed all these various species since humans started spreading. Anyways, he had a kind of very mature view towards child raising, and so I learned how to debate from him at a very young age. And me and my friends, when we would go to the playground, we'd play our usual games, and we would debate. These little kids arguing back and forth, debating for a couple hours. And so, kind of growing up like that. He was very into science, and so I too was very into science. I'm very, might call it a devotee of science. And, you just believe, scientists say something, okay, the new study has proved this, that's, and go with that. Science has proved it. Of course, they're always coming out with new studies, some of them which seem to completely overthrow the findings of older studies, but never mind. I was a devotee, so whatever science seemed to say, I was on the bandwagon. And one of the views that science had was this kind of idea that basically we're totally made up of materials. It's called this materialist worldview. In other words, the materialist worldview is that everything is material. There's nothing immaterial to the world. Memories have a physical essence in our brain. We are the number of brain cells. Our personality is a direct result of our brain. It's not a mind to the brain. The mind is a byproduct of the physical activity of the brain. And with the death of our physical body, when our physical body stops working, that's it. We all become kind of stardust. So I was kind of very into this worldview, this kind of scientific worldview. And of course, there's a lot of fun things about that worldview. If we're all going to become stardust, then, well, we can do a lot of, really crazy things right now. And we're not going
police don't catch you and you don't end up in jail, then it's possible with the materialist worldview for one to have one's cake and eat the cake too, as long as you don't get caught. And so remember coming to Buddhism and first reading about the Four Noble Truths, and because this person in my life early on had taught me to debate a lot. I was very into debating. I had a very skeptical attitude towards things, especially religions. And remember going in to read these Four Noble Truths. Actually, it was a book that my mother got me. And the name of the book was If the Buddha Dated. It was a joke. She gave it to me as a joke. But in the book, there had this section. It was kind of very New Agey. And going through the book, and it came to this point where it's like, these are the central tenets of Buddhism. And I remember thinking when I'm reading that paragraph, okay, here's the central tenets of Buddhism. I'm going to see huge flaws in the central tenets of Buddhism, and I'm going to totally disagree with it like I did. Well, not totally, but I'm going to leave kind of dissatisfied, like with most other religions. And so it went through a kind of very, a little bit New Agey rendition of the Four Noble Truths, but I remember maybe by the second Noble Truth, I was just totally converted to Buddhism. It was kind of, you see these kind of stories in the canon where there's these people who are debaters. Ancient India had a very strong debating tradition. Actually, one of the ways that Buddhism actually ended up leaving ancient India was that they'd have these debates, and like a monk and their followers, and there was a fellow named Adi Shankara, whose grand teacher was actually a Buddhist, interestingly enough. And he took a lot of Buddhist doctrines, incorporated them into Hinduism, and he was very good at debating. And by that time, Buddhism had unfortunately degenerated quite a bit. And so he would go and debate with prominent Buddhists. And I think one of the stakes were really high. Even if you lost, you had to convert to the other person's religion with all their followers. So they had this kind of very strong debating tradition in India. And it was there at the time of the Buddha. You can see people coming up, they were very skilled debaters. And they'll get sent with, they have this pre-formulated idea. They'll be like, what does the Samana Gautama teach? And then they'll say, okay, he teaches this. Well, I'm going to say this to him, and he won't be able to overcome it. And so they go to the Buddha, and they're ready to debate with him. And after they leave, they're converted. It kind of happens so many times. They're all ready to debate with the Buddha, and they leave, they're like his disciple. You just keep reading this over and over in the canon. Anyways, this is one of the kind of things that basically happened to me. I really loved to debate, ready to debate with the Buddha, and ready to throw it all down, and ended up leaving a kind of disciple of the Buddha after reading them. And one of the things that you first come up against when you convert from science to Buddhism, basically become a devotee of the Buddha, and start to trust him, is that you come up against this idea of rebirth. One of the first things that come smack in the face, because this is a very strong part of the materialist doctrine. This idea that there's no rebirth. And actually, people, it doesn't have to be. There's nothing in science that says there can't be rebirth. But over a period of time, basically through a conflict with Christianity, mainly, it became an entrenched dogma in scientific thinking, that there is nothing after this life. And so coming up against this kind of dogma, coming up against this doctrine, and thinking this made sense, one of the things that kind of made sense to me as to why there might be a rebirth was this kind of seeing the seasons. There's one of the things about the Buddhist teaching, he talks about this, how things arise and pass away, is that there's principles on the small scale that apply to things on a large scale. And there's actually something in science itself. In science, they call it scale invariance. No need to teach a bunch of scientific principles, but basically you have these laws of physics. And those same laws, maybe not quantum physics, but the laws of physics apply to things that are really small and things that are really huge. That's why it's a law. It just applies. And so you watch the erosion patterns of sand in the desert, and you see these kind of real dunes and all these things. If you see an aerial photograph of that dune, you don't know if the dune is this big or is like a mountain. Because the laws of physics apply in the same way, and the dunes kind of form or deform or whatever in the same way in that environment. So what made sense to me was, look, there's these kind of laws to things. There's a kind of principle that carried over from science. And because there's these laws, they should apply across the board. They should apply on the small scale, should apply on the large scale. And so to me, this made a lot of sense. And look, you've got the seasons. Everything is cyclic. You see, actually, I remember being a business student. And one of the first things you learn about in economics is this kind of thing called the business cycle. In other words, there's this cycle that you can't seem to really stop. Where the economy goes up for a while, then it goes down. It goes up, and it goes down. This kind of cycle in the economy is actually driven by craving. People know this. It's driven by people's desires. People consume things for a while. They take on debt for a while. They're confident for a while. Then it changes in people's minds. And this has a real effect on the economy, on the amount of money people are willing to spend, the number of people they're willing to hire, and so how much GDP gets produced. And this thing is not just economic. You see cycles kind of everywhere you look. You see it with nature, of course. It goes from spring to summer, to fall, to winter, to spring again. It's kind of this thing. It's kind of the conditions that are in one season sometimes lead on to the conditions in another. The conditions that are in one mind state lead on to the conditions in another. And this is why these things cycle around each other. Interesting thing, one starts to look for these things in nature, in one's own mind, starts to see these kind of principles, especially in history. You look at the rise and fall of various governments, various civilizations. Oftentimes, it's when they're at their apex. Like the Roman Empire, maybe, not to be too controversial, but maybe the US today. When these things are at their apex, that's when the conditions that lead to their decline set in. And when they're at their nadir, they're at their bottom, that's when the conditions that lead to their rise set in. In other words, these things just seem to cycle around themselves all over again, over and over, cycling over and over, over and over, driven by craving, driven by desire, that drives these things. Of course, maybe not the movement, maybe not the change of the seasons, but more the mental factors, the business cycle, the rise and fall of civilizations. These cycles kind of all over the place. So this made a lot of sense to me, personally. Look, there's all these cycles. What if, science thinks that's the end, the rebirth, but what if there's a portion that I'm just not seeing? Kind of, the universe is supposed to be linear, time is supposed to be linear, but we don't really know when the universe started. We weren't there. They have various theories now about when the universe started, but one of the interesting things I was reading in one of the most recent science books, as kind of this one kind of rogue scientist, he says, look, a lot of these kind of things where people date back the beginning of the universe, they're based on what are called kind of cosmological constants. In other words, there's these things in science that are supposed to be the same all the time. One of them is the speed of light. A lot of the kind of theories in physics are based on this constant speed of light that doesn't change. One of the things they found is that they measure the speed of light from different directions and it changes. There's actually these people called metrologists who their job is to measure these things. There's scientists who measure these cosmological constants. And what they find is they get all these different measurements. It's kind of embarrassing. So they kind of average them out. And apparently what they did now is I can't remember the exact formula, they changed the formula for the speed of light so that it's fixed by definition now. And kind of these embarrassing fluctuations disappear. But anyways, all that is to say that what if these kind of things that I thought were linear were actually cyclic? I'm just seeing one part. I'm just seeing maybe their rise. I'm not seeing their steady state. I'm not seeing their fall. So what that did for me personally was it basically opened up the possibility that there was this kind of rebirth. This wasn't the only lifetime. That this kind of cycles that are there in the business world, that are there in the external world, that are there in the mind. These are cycles that carry on after our death, perpetuate other places. This is one of the actually interesting things in Buddhist doctrine is this idea of rebirth, of dying and being reborn, is something that's actually a spur to our practice. If you think about it, if all there is this life, all there is just until the end, and that's it, a lot of the motivation for practicing meditation goes out. There's only so much one is willing to sacrifice, only so much one is willing to do. And that's because there'll be no consequence after death. So it's kind of very interesting. Today I was actually talking to Bhante Ratanasiri, and Bhante is the senior monk at this temple, or the chief monk. The senior monk is Venerable Upatissa. And Bhante writes in a series, birthday is actually next week on Tuesday. And Bhante Wimala, they're the two kind of, what you call it, they've been the leaders of this temple organization, I think, for a long time, and are the ones who built it up. And I was saying, oh, very nice, Bhante, both you and Bhante Wimala have birthdays on the same day, here. And Bhante has a very good sense of humor, and he was like, yes, some people think monks shouldn't celebrate their birthdays, He says, he says, one thing I celebrate is that there's many, many different ways to die, and yet I've avoided all of them, and now I'm 70 years old. But then the other thing he said was actually, you talk to these senior monks and they'll joke, whatever, quite a lot of wisdom in what they say. And then the second thing he said was, also we celebrate our birthday because looking back on our life, if you spend your life well, then as you come to the end of your life, you can be very happy about the way that you spent it. So he said, I look back at my life, I've been a Buddhist monk for so many years, I've done so many good things, so I can look back on my life that this is a reason to celebrate. Kind of very rare opportunity. When we have this kind of perspective of these different lifetimes, the chance to do good for one's whole life is very rare. And passing along from here, when one does good, one's mind feels at ease. And in most religions, they teach after that, you get quite a reward for doing good. Much better than the reward you get, say, for studying for 4 years. You study for 4 years in high school, you get 40 years of a good career. You devote 40 years of your life to doing good, sometimes you might get like 10 million years out of that. Even longer. And some of the places you can be reborn last eons. Some of the people, some of the places where beings are reborn, they actually feed on joy. That's their food. Kind of their life is feeding on joy, this feeling of bliss. That's what sustains existence in some of these realms. So they're very good things to do. So this is one of the interesting things. And he went on further to say, there's a sutta where the Buddha talks about, how lucky one is to encounter in Buddhist teaching. Basically teachings on how to do good. The Buddhist teachings are special in the Buddhist worldview. But how lucky one is to encounter these things. He says, there's a sutta where one monk says, even if I live for 1 day and 1 night, that would be something very good for me. I could do a lot of good in that time. And then it goes down and there's another monk who says, even if I live for the amount of time it takes to finish a meal, that would be very good. There's a lot that I could do with my life in that time. And then another monk says, even if I live for the amount of time it takes me to breathe in or breathe out, even then, I could do good. That way I'd be able to do much with my life. And there was one more, I can't remember it. Does anybody here remember the last one? It was even shorter. And so then he said, the Buddha said the monk who said, if I could live for a day and night, I could do much. He's lazy. And he said, the monk who said, even if I live for the amount of time it takes me to breathe in and breathe out, or, I can't remember the last one was even shorter, those monks are living diligently. What was it?
I think it's one breath in, because one of them was taste of food too. It's mindfulness of death.
Yeah, does it taste food? Okay, so then the last one was breathing. Okay, so the last one was a breath. So those two, the last two, maybe tasting food and breathing in and out, those monks are living diligently for the destruction of the taints. And so this is one of the effects that having this view, changing a worldview to a possibility of rebirth has, is that it makes a person's life valuable. Makes it something very valuable. There's more meaning to a person's life than just how many trips, how many houses, how many cars. Looking back, okay, I went on a bunch of trips, I didn't do this one, oh man, It's more a person looks back on their life, how much good did I do in the time that was available to me? How well did I spend my time in this life? And this is something that a person can look back on with joy. So this is something that can be difficult, again, in Western culture. There's a scientific background. There's also a kind of Christian background. In the Christian tradition, when one does good with the right hand, one doesn't let the left hand know about it. In other words, you don't talk about the good you did, and best sometimes not even to think about the good you did. And you can see, this is not to knock the Christian tradition, but you can see the reason behind that is don't get conceited about the good you did. But unfortunately, one of the downfalls of having a view that there's no rebirth, that we shouldn't think about the good we did, is that one, a person's life becomes about consumption. Two, a person starts to dislike oneself. If our life is just about consuming things, that's why you see all these various things, like people are like, humans are a virus. Kind of remember watching this movie, The Matrix, and humans were like a virus. And this is a kind of common metaphor for humans today. But previously, it wasn't that way. I mean, humane, the word humane comes from this idea that humans are good. Humane means generous, means kind, means compassionate. And when we adopt this view that there's more to our life than just this, we adopt this view that the purpose of our life, one of the best things we can do with it is doing good, is training our minds, then this becomes what our life is about. We reflect on that frequently, and what tends to fall away is a lot of this self-hatred that can sometimes plague the Western culture. I remember there's been times when there's been people I've known, and I've talked to them about good deeds they've done, and it's like they don't want to talk about it. It's like it's embarrassing, or they argue about the good they've done. It's like, look, you've done good, and it makes them unhappy to reflect on the good that they've done. Now, this is a source of loss in Western culture. If one can look back on one's life and remember all the good things that one has done, this is a source of wealth in the mind. It makes one's mind happy. Look, I've done this, that's good. I've done that, that's good. I've done these things, that's good. I've spent my life well. One starts to develop the perception that one is a good person. One's mind inclines towards doing good. One feels good about oneself. One feels good about one's life. So actually in the Sri Lankan tradition, they have this kind of book. It's called a Ping Pota, And when they're young, they start doing good things, and their parents get them to write down all the good deeds they did. Like maybe at the end of your life, that's a lot. Some Sri Lankans are doing good stuff a lot. It's like they're just their life is just devoted to good works. I think obviously Christians too, or any religion, people who take that on. But at the end of their life, the interesting thing is that when they're dying, people are supposed to read from this Ping Pota to them. Read about all the good things they did. And when one does that, their mind becomes bright. Their mind becomes happy. Look, this is the way I've spent my life. My life has been well spent. It's rare, Even living for another day, another moment, I could still do more good. And I would do that. And when one's mind is placid like that, as one gets old, as one's ability to enjoy various sensual pleasures falls away, as one retires, as one's career falls away, one's happiness doesn't have to fall away with it. One's ability to consume falls away with these things, but one's happiness doesn't have to. That is, if one takes this perspective. There's an investment that I can make in my life. An investment that goes beyond just consumption. An investment that goes to a happiness that comes from doing good deeds, but that stays with the mind. Something that I carry with me. Something that I can reflect on. Both when I'm doing the deed, when I grow old, as my cycle takes me to my 69th year, like Bhante Ratanasiri, this is a way that one can look back. My life has been well spent. I've done good. I'm a good person, and I have good things in store for me. And when these kind of reflections become a basis in one's mind, then fear of old age starts to fall away. Old age starts to lose its fear. Sickness starts to lose its fear. A lot of the fears that come with these things are actually fears that we won't be able to consume anymore. We won't be able to eat the things we've been eating, won't be able to hang out with the people we've been hanging out with, won't be able to do the work that we've been doing. So instead we learn to have a different basis for our mind. There's a basis in what they call the Dhamma, a basis in wholesome qualities, making this one of the purposes of our life, learning to fill our life with good deeds, to fill our mind with brightness. And when we do this, this is something that lasts. Lasts beyond the good deed, lasts beyond just the day, lasts beyond just the meal, lasts beyond just the taste of the food, beyond the in and out breath, lasts beyond death. It's something that greets us as we pass over, something that makes us happy in this life and in lives to come.